Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about something that happened in the House of Commons this week, where Jagmeet Singh, leader of the federal NDP, tries to bring up the issue of inflation and Canadians not being able to afford groceries or gas. I'm not sure why. Okay, I don't pay attention to what goes on in Parliament sittings, but I'm not sure why this would be like novel or maybe the first time this would be brought up because obviously people have been going through this for many months. But basically, what happened was that, and you can go to his TikTok, I guess, not to plug his TikTok, but this is where the video is. Basically, other MPs, and he labels them as conservative MPs, start laughing, and then he can't finish his point because they're laughing, and then the Speaker of the House. Is it Speaker of the House?
I think it's the Speaker of the House.
Am I getting American and Canadian mixed up?
No, I think it's the
Maybe
Speaker of
it
the
is the
House.
House?
I'm pretty
Okay,
sure it's the
great.
Speaker of the House, yeah.
Asks him to restart, and then he just points out that he had to restart because they were laughing at the idea of people not being able to afford their groceries. So, anyways, Omar, you actually brought this to my attention. So, yeah, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I thought it was a really interesting video. Obviously, the reaction, the focus in the video is this laughter that comes after the comment that is made about Canadians not being able to afford groceries, basic necessities because of inflation. Companies are raking in record high profits, and the NDP wants to tax those parties and put money tax those companies and put money right into people's pockets. And at first, I was a little bit confused as to who exactly the laughter might have been directed to, because I think Jagmeet Singh has been the victim of a lot of pointed harassment, basically, about his decision to align himself with Justin Trudeau. So part of me was thinking, oh, what if they're just laughing at him? But then I read more comments and I realized that there's a pretty high possibility that these politicians are just basically laughing at the statements that he's making, and basically laughing at the fact that, millions of Canadians are essentially struggling to pay their basic necessities. And they could be laughing at that. They could also be laughing at this idea that companies are making record high profits. The reason I say that is because a lot of conservatives and the, finance kind of side of media has criticized this talking point by saying that this is normal, that every business needs to be directed and is directed towards making profit and revenue. So if that happens, that's inherently a good thing, regardless of the circumstances, which I think we're going to talk more about it later, but I think we can clearly see why that's wrong when we have, people struggling to make, basic food, basic rent, basic utility payments. So yeah, I feel like when I saw the video, it reinforced this kind of inherent disrespect that I think is coming down constantly from what you might call, the ruling class, or people who are in positions to own capital, people who are in positions to control levers of power. I think are pretty very disrespectful, very condescending, I think, towards working people in Canada who not only struggle to provide for themselves, but I think also are really propping up this entire system. We are the ones who provide value, who make sure that Canada even runs to begin with. Yet, these are also the same people who get laughed at and who get ridiculed, or who have someone who's speaking on their behalf get ridiculed. So yeah, it's a pretty disgusting situation, in my opinion. But the fact that it can happen so brazenly and so openly and so publicly, I think definitely speaks to the current situation we have now. So that's kind of my take on it. That's kind of what I thought.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I do still think it's unclear well, who was laughing and what they were laughing at. I think all that's clear is that he saw this as an opportunity to paint it, I guess, as you just described, right? I think something you also mentioned is that Jagmeet Singh has gotten a lot of criticism for aligning himself with the liberals and basically by doing so just undermining his whole party's agenda. And I think what is perhaps equally condescending and elitist as what Jagmeet Singh is saying is laughter from conservative members of parliament towards members of the working class who are struggling is his own use of the working class's struggles kind of as a pawn in his own political game to paint himself, I guess, as an advocate for this group of people that he, through his own actions, has really failed and set himself up to fail to actually help.
No, absolutely. I think that's a really, really very important point to make, because there've been several opportunities for the federal NDP to, I think, make deeper connections and more meaningful connections with working class people, to represent them in a meaningful way, to pass policies that would benefit them in a meaningful way. And I think it does nothing to help the NDP's, I guess, characterization as liberals in a hurry to align with the federal liberals and create a coalition government, basically, to allow them to rule. And I think it also makes it very difficult for him to credibly criticize Justin Trudeau, who, in my opinion, has been relatively disastrous for workers. It makes it very hard to criticize him credibly if you are giving him a bunch of power instead of really standing on your own, which is very difficult to do, but I think is what should have been done, in my opinion. Standing on your own as a party and giving people real policies, giving people real alternatives that they can support on their own, that you can lead with and that you can go to an election with. Because I think what the NDP often does, and I think especially provincially, and we just saw them lose in Ontario recently to a pretty weak Doug Ford government, if you ask me. We have an election coming up in Alberta, and what the NDP does, at least in my opinion and what I've seen, is they love attacking what other parties are doing. I think they love latching on to current policy, but what they don't do is provide a very clear, tangible working policy or option or alternative for people to actually buy into. Because I think it's very simple and very easy to point the finger or to base all of your policies off not doing what the other people are doing. But to actually give people something is a completely different story. So
yeah, that's right. And I mean, in this situation here, where essentially he is in power because of how he's aligned himself with the Liberal government, what he's offering as solution is just the ultimate platitudes. He just says, we want to tax these excess profits. Obviously, that's not going to happen, because the reason those aren't getting taxed is because of loopholes that obviously are not getting closed. And we're going to put that directly into the pockets of workers. That literally means nothing. It just sounds, I guess it sounds nice. Maybe if it's the first time you're hearing it, but this is kind of what politicians always say when they're using the working class as pawns in order to bolster their own seat of power. And then kind of, what he's reduced to is, because he's has his hands tied behind his back, he isn't able to really criticize the people in power. He's unable to criticize what's being done about the inflation situation or what is being done to support workers and ordinary people. He just has to paint it as this, like, oh, the conservatives are laughing and I care about people. And that's really all it just gets reduced to. So, anyways, I think takeaways here are just obviously everyone knows that inflation is happening and is experiencing inflation, and I think this is just a good window into how and I guess why nothing is getting done about it in our federal government.
No, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, I think there's also something to be said about the fact that yeah, the NDP aren't advocating against capitalism, a system that inherently causes inflation, which we know impacts workers the most, who have to deal with higher cost of living and stagnant wages. So yeah, I have very little, I guess, support or understanding for a party that still supports this disastrous system and has no interest in even speaking critically about it publicly.
Yeah, I think at one point there was a little bit more hope for the federal NDPs. I think that like provincially, we've basically always had a conservative NDP party here, at least in any kind of recent memory when they've actually been close to power. But yeah, it is very sad to see how the federal NDP party's been diminished post coalition.
Mm-hmm.